Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of 10 Ton Hammer Talks. This will be episode number 4 for us, kind of a brand new show here. I'm not sure if everybody here that is familiar with it. I saw a lot of activity in the chat already, so thank you guys for coming and showing up. Always fun to have the chat interacting in this format. So our show today is about, it's titled Forget About the Fun, and we'll explain what that is later. But I wanted to introduce my fellow co-host again, Jeremy Maxwell, with us. Sorry, Jeremy Mac. You two together are totally messing me up
name
here.
he was going for there.
So yes, but he's joining me again today, and then we have a special guest from Ilphonic on here today as well, in the lead systems designer, Snipe Hunter, otherwise known as Adam Maxwell. So.
Howdy.
There he is.
That one sorted out.
He was hiding behind the hammer. I got it set. All right, so yeah, thanks you guys for showing up. I'll pass it to Jeremy really quick here while I kind of tweak some things and make sure we're good.
Alrighty. So if anyone is having video issues, just real quick refresh the stream. I was seeing it on my end. Once I refreshed, it looked like it came through okay. I'm just going to keep an eye on that, but it looks like it should be good. So yeah, if you're having any issues, just refresh. We should be all right. Other than that, so as always, I'd like to just give a quick shout out to our employers at 10 Ton Hammer who allow us to do this show. Obviously, we hope to keep it going, keep making it bigger. In order to do that, though, basically we need you guys to show 10 Ton Hammer a little love. So 10tonhammer.com. Obviously, a lot of MMO coverage, esports coverage as well, guides, opinions, news, all that. So they're nice enough to let us do these things. So we need to return the love a little bit. But other than that, we're really enjoying the show so far. We've had a few episodes under our belt. This is our first one where we get a guest that we're pretty excited about, so we do hope you guys enjoy. Definitely keep in touch with us during the chat. Obviously, we're not going to be able to respond to every single comment, but we will definitely try to get you guys in here. Again, this isn't a type of show where we talk and you listen. It's very much about the interaction and making you guys as big a part of this as possible. So definitely talk to us, let us know what you're thinking. If at any point you have any questions, anything you want to talk about, if we are able to, we definitely want to get as much of what you guys think in here as possible. So definitely excited to see what we can do, and hopefully all any potential tech issues have been worked out by the mastermind Alex behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think I got it all set. So as Jeremy mentioned, we have Adam here, and he's going to, there's a lot of names I recognize in chat, so that's awesome, you guys. Thanks for coming and supporting us over here. People from Revival Cast and the Revival forums. But for those that may not know who you are, Snipe Hunter, maybe you, for our YouTube viewers as well, could you talk about maybe a little bit of your background, some history, some other things you've worked on, and what you do for Revival? We might have a little delay in him getting that. I think he dropped for a second.
It seems like.
Yeah, for sure. On Revival, I'm kind of the lead systems designer. I often call myself the game architect because my job is basically to come up with the rules of the game. Am I back yet?
Yeah, you are.
Yes.
There's a bit of a delay, so we'll just go with it. Keep going.
Got it. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. To be honest, everybody is watching a Star Citizen presentation going on in Germany right now, so our bandwidth is a little limited. So to get back to what I was saying, I'm the lead game architect on Revival. My job is to sort of come up with the rules of the game and the laws of the world, basically. And it's actually my 4th MMO project at this point. My very first one was called Auto Assault. One of the few places I covered auto a lot was 10 Ton Hammer, so I'm familiar with 10 Ton Hammer at all. But yeah, so I worked on Auto Assault. Then later I worked with Ombois on a game called Rift. And then after that on a game called Fortune Online, which became Marvel Heroes for Gazillion. And so, now I'm back working with Ombois and the guys at Ilphonic on Revival.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm excited. I've had a chance to actually get to talk to you quite a few times through Revival Cast and through through just working with 10 Ton Hammer and stuff like that, getting to go down and see you guys' studio was a lot of fun. So I guess since I've been there, you guys are getting a lot closer to your online client. Is one of the new things that's coming up. Do you have any updates for that for anybody that's following that closely?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I have some bad news in that we're not going to ship it today, which is something I was personally really hoping we could pull off. But we're basically down to fixing one last major issue. We had our camera sort of freaked out on us in the middle of the week. But as soon as we have that fixed, man, we're good to go. So it's like any minute now.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited for that. Let me go here to, I believe it was on Wednesday, I posted a column entry that kind of talked about some things that have been on my mind recently as far as MMOs. Last week I did an article on free-to-play, and I went ahead and what I wrote this past Wednesday was kind of a follow-up to that in some ways, talking about, you know, how mass appeal and player expectations, kind of playing off of last episode from 10 Ton Hammer Talks. We were talking about this player appeal and how, you know, what our expectations are can kind of drive and change the way things come off. So I wrote an article. I don't know if you got to check it out. I'll drop a link in the chat here in a minute, but just to kind of introduce the topic, I was basically posing the point that there's actually, you know, the power of niche games like Revival, that are kind of coming in, not necessarily gearing to target everybody out there and being, you know, the next World of Warcraft, but just picking something that they want to do well, you know, and innovating in that realm. So that was kind of a lot of what I talked about, and how mass appeal actually, and just trying to make a game that's just fun for everybody, might not be the best decision for MMO games, and how it has hurt some other games is, you know, they've kind of lost their identity. So that's kind of what the gist of the article was. You guys can go check it out for more details. But as far as talking Revival and talking with you, Adam, as a systems designer, you guys with Revival seem to be veering away from this idea of, hey, let's, you know, make a game that everybody's going to like. You just it looks like you guys are making a game that has this very specific theme and taste kind of to it, and you guys are designing your systems around
Absolutely.
that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and in fact, actually, I thought that the column that you did was sort of deeply personal for me. The issue that you called out is something that's been bothering me almost my entire career, man. Like, every game I work on, every game anybody in the industry works on, let's be fair, always has this sort of contingent of people who's like, yeah, but how does it express joy? How is it fun? And it's a hard thing to get across to a lot of people that sometimes getting fun immediately with no extra effort makes it less fun. You know what I mean? That you can actually suppress joy in your effort to make joy the only thing that you're trying to express with your game. Because we forget that joy comes through things like accomplishment and through hard work and overcoming something difficult. So like, you know, not to wax philosophical, but there's a Thomas Paine quote that I particularly like that relates to this. And he says that which we achieve too easily, we esteem too cheaply. It's dearness alone that gives a thing its value, right? And that's like kind of a mantra for my design sensibilities. And Revival for us is a chance to finally like just focus on that, just make the game that we want to make, that is, you know, all of the challenge and the effort and none of the concern about the fact that maybe not everybody will find the joy in it. You know, the people that will find the joy in it are the people we want to play. If you're not that person, that's cool, but maybe our game's not for you.
Yeah, it's kind of a really refreshing thing to see developers kind of shrug away that, you know, weight of, hey, we got to make a game that's going to, you know, survive by, you know, drawing in a ton of people, and just kind of counting on the idea that if you make a great game, it's going to be fun to play for the people that enjoy that type of game, and those people are going to, you know, pay to support it. I think you guys, one of the things that you guys are doing is offering a subscription service basically to it for a different type of play experience, and that's going to, help fund the project of, running that specific game type.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for that.
Well, yeah. Actually, we're really stoked to be able to pull that off. Live storytelling is something that Olmo and I have been wanting to do for, God, at this point, almost 20 years, and cost is always the issue, right? Like, everybody's like, hey, you're gonna need 34 people per server working in 3 shifts, and that's a lot of people, and that's a lot of money, and they're totally right. We realized if we built the systems the way we did, that we could sort of reduce the cost by only applying that effort to the servers where the people were playing that were willing to pay for it. And so, we can build the game where we have all of these free-to-play features that will help us just keep the servers themselves going. But then for like generating new content, we have our storytellers, and they're subsidized directly by the players that interact with them, which is perfect. It's sort of self-sustaining, and hopefully, if we grow into bigger servers, that'll mean more subscriptions, which will mean we can hire all the extra storytellers, and so it should be this sort of feedback loop that just keeps the game going for as long as we need it to.
So let me ask a kind of more of a general sense, and just to give kind of background for me, I'm the kind of, like, I'm a lifelong gamer. I've never really gotten hugely into MMOs, but the concept has always been, intriguing to me. And I think one of the interesting things that you'll see with a lot of MMOs is that they'll have a lot of big ideas, but then they always have to, scale down based on, well, can we actually do this? Or, is this going to keep our, 10 million subscriber base, happy and all that? And it seems like, from what I've been seeing, that Revival has a lot of big ideas, and you're just, obviously, there's always restrictions, but you're like, we have a big idea, let's fight like hell to make sure this gets in the game. So, like, what is, I guess, the difference in philosophy, and what kind of challenges do you have when, obviously, you want to do things differently? You don't just want to be another MMO. There's a lot of things that Revival's looking to do differently. So, how do you kind of make that happen, and, what is that kind of process, creative process like?
It's a pain. So, like, a lot of what we do is trying to figure out how to make it feel like we want it to feel, rather than make it actually function the way it appears to. And so a lot of our work is like, well, we want to model, something like politics, and we want nations to have treaties and diplomacy with each other and all this, like, super complicated stuff. But we won't really consider it unless we can figure out a way to abstract that down to, a few simple computations and then a bunch of player interaction. With the idea of the player interaction is where the real meat of that content is going to come from anyway. And so the hard part for us is how to get from the big idea down to an actual implementable feature set without giving up what makes that idea big in the first place. And we end up making a lot of, like, what we call silent sacrifices. A lot of, like, things happen on the back end where we're like, well, if we're going to get politics, then that means we're going to need to do, a multi-tiered abstract AI system, and that means we're going to need a huge server, and so that means we're only going to probably be able to do like 10 servers total across the whole world with our budget. And so we do things like that. We'll sacrifice potential exposure in exchange for the features we know that are going to make the game what it has to be, and those are tough calls to make. They're really hard, but honestly, we don't think the game would be worth it without them.
Yeah, I think one thing that's been interesting too, as I've been following this game closely over the past, I don't know, it's been probably 6 months at least now, is kind of getting into your guys' background, yourself and Chris Holtorf and Kedron, and the projects you guys have worked on. And the interesting thing that I don't know how many people know, I know a lot of the people in chat that are here know, but a lot of the systems that you guys are tweaking and changing to put into Revival have been systems you've designed for other MMOs that just didn't make the cut because of choices by management on those games. So can you talk about some of the systems that are, you're going to be able to successfully kind of infuse in there based on your past experience of things you've created and haven't gotten to put in past games?
Yeah, actually, the sort of core of the game is the system that we call the information tagging system, which was actually a concept that originally started in a supernation form in the very first MMO I worked on, a game called Auto Assault, where we came up with a way to make what would now be called like
area quests and stuff happen in that world. We ultimately didn't use it because all of our open world stuff ended up becoming instanced in that game, and so all of that kind of got thrown away. And then we started working on Heroes of Talara, which would become Rift. And that game, if you recall some of the early press, was literally based entirely on the idea of dynamic content. And what that was us blowing out that original idea from Auto Assault into a much bigger sort of version of it, where we scaled up its scope, and in result, scaled up its effect and its complexity. And then ultimately, when it came time to make Rift, and time came, time concerns became what they were, and budget concerns became what they were. Rift's version of that sort of basically became Area Quest 2 in the form of the portals. I mean, they're better than Area Quest. I'm not dissing Rift, but they're also not what we were trying to do. And so those systems ended up sort of on the cutting room floor as well. And so Revival is built on all these ideas that we've had, at this point, almost 2 decades to sort of formulate and refine and think about. And all of that sort of comes together in, the information tagging system and how it relates to the virtual DM and this sort of like cluster of systems that make the world tick. And it's awesome to finally get the chance to do it, but it also is like sort of gut-wrenching in that, you can think something's perfect for 14 years, but it's you actually put it into the game and see it, you don't really know for sure. And so it's also trepidatious.
Definitely.
So let me ask, because kind of to get back to our original point in that, obviously there's a balance to be struck between not going, too mass market in the appeal, because obviously, as we talked about, that creates its own problems, and then you start sacrificing your vision for the game, which is never good for anybody. But then obviously at the same time, you do have to appeal to enough players that, the game can be sustainable. So
yep.
What's kind of the internal dialogue like, where you say, okay, this is our vision for the game, these are the big things we want, this is how we're going to separate ourselves from the crowd, and that's all fantastic, and here's why this game is going to be great. So how are we going to make sure still that we're doing enough that we're going to have a player base that's going to see our vision, that's going to help sustain this game?
Yeah, it's tough. So Omwa, Chris Holtorf, Kedron, and myself, we kind of form a cabal at the center of all of the design decisions of the game. And so every time each of us is working on one of the features or content pieces that we're responsible for, we'll sort of review it together, and we'll ask ourselves questions. One of the questions we have is, how do we deal with the million-man problem? And it's a sort of double-edged problem. On the one side, how can you deal with this game becoming way more popular than we expect it to be? But on the other side, how can you deal with the idea that we need a certain number of people on the server in order to sort of pay the bill and keep the lights on? And so every time we put a feature in, hardcore PvP is a perfect example of this, the question becomes, well, does this scale? And if the answer is yes, then the next question is, does it scale in both directions? What happens when there aren't enough people? Can the fact that there are 4 times as many PvP players than PvE players ruin it for the PvE players? And does that mean we're going to lose, the ability to actually run the game? And so we have to be super critical about everything we do. And and this happens on every MMO, to be clear. This isn't even a problem specifically for Revival or anything. It's just that for most games, the answer is, well, we need to do whatever gets us the most players. Whereas for Revival, there's also a second step, which is, how much of what Revival is are we going to sacrifice for those players? Because if it's too much, then we won't do it. And that puts us in a very strange place, but I honestly think it's a better way to make a good game, so hopefully it works out.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by the fact that you guys are doing that, and also too the really kind of getting more in your realm of the court with systems design specifically. You guys are kind of taking another road, I would say, in systems design from just kind of a philosophical standpoint. Instead of making huge complex systems that have it's kind of like you branch into a game. I would say Star Citizen's a great example of here's a huge system and it's like an alternate branch of the game, whereas it seems like Revival is developing small interconnecting systems that the complexity is going to come from how they interact with each other.
Absolutely. And it actually kind of rose out of some of the old projects that we worked on as well. Whole systems of Rift and whole systems of Auto Assault and the entirety of that Fortune Online game I was talking about were what we kind of call megalithic, right? They were these massive, huge, complicated systems, and anytime you had a problem in them, you had to tear the whole thing apart and sort of rebuild it to make it work, right? Rift's version of dynamic content, for example, used this sort of like massive list selection system, and if one entry in the list was messed up, a whole area in the game get no content, and just finding that bug and fixing it the first time took an amazing amount of effort because of how complicated and sort of massive that one system was. And so for us, the sort of little tiny gears sort of working together was a way to solve the production issues with complicated systems, right? It's way easier if you can just pull out the one gear that's broken, fix it, put it back into the system, and let it run. And what we discovered in our early sort of research into doing it this way is that way cooler things can happen. Like, we sort of stumbled onto the idea of using emergent behavior without even understanding what the concept was at the time. Because for us, it wasn't about making it emergent so much as it was about making it actually possible to build these massive, complicated structures. You know, it's the whole, you move a mountain by first carrying away small stones sort of thing, right? But as it turns out, in doing so, all sorts of cool things happen, and things get better.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for the systems you guys are making, just the ones you guys have talked about, and explained a little bit how you're intending them to work with, having weather affect things, having it, I just love how the little systems all affect every other system. It's just kind of different than what you see from, I don't know, I can't even really think of too many specific examples, but I guess World of Warcraft, you have like your garrison system or something like that. Like, that is kind of a standalone thing. It doesn't, it has some outreach a little bit, but it doesn't affect everything, whereas, you implement a system like weather and all of a sudden it's affecting, what people are doing in town, what the whalers are able to accomplish out, what type of gear you're able to wear in that environment, on a personal level. So it's really intriguing how that, one little system can kind of shake up the whole thing. And it's kind of something I saw with EverQuest Next, and they were trying to do that in certain systems of their thing, but not in the whole thing. So Revival's kind of one of these games that is actually taking that and applying it to like every system. It's really interesting.
Yeah, so, it's definitely
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it's definitely a new approach. Actually, I have a ton of respect for the Daybreak guys, because when they first announced what they were doing with EQ Next, I was like, oh, thank God somebody's finally going to do it. And then, we got the chance to work on Revival, and so now I'm like, hey, I get to do it too,
Yeah. That's awesome. So we're going to keep this going, guys. We're also going to open it up a little bit here, get some Q&A going. So anyone in chat, if you have any questions for Snipe Hunter, just throw them in the chat. We'll keep going here, but we'll definitely try to work in as many of your guys' questions as possible. So as I just put them in the chat. I will say that one of the things that impressed me when I was looking over for Revival is a lot of games, whether it be MMO or otherwise, and I've certainly seen with MMOs, is they'll kind of try to hide the fact that they want your money, or just or just accept that, well, yeah, of course it's a subscription, and just leave it at that. And I think that the openness and honesty that was on Revival's side, like literally when I was reading it, it actually surprised me how straightforward you guys are with, all right, here's what we want to do, here's what we need from you, and here's what we want to give you guys back, in exchange for supporting the game. And I thought it was honestly very refreshing, because you don't see that from most games, I would say, just that level of honesty and just putting all the cards on the table. And I think that can be very good, for kind of building a relationship with the audience. So was that kind of the thought process, or how did you guys decide to just put that all on the table like that?
No, absolutely. We knew from the get-go that we were going to live or die based on how well we connected with potential players of the game. And so we wanted to make sure that we, treated them with the same respect that we wanted as gamers ourselves, right? And so the idea was just try to be as honest as we possibly can. And if you follow our forums, you can see that that's sometimes caused us some difficulties, like if we happen to have to change our mind, or if we implemented some feature on the store later than like after somebody already bought a house or something like that. Then they're like, hey, if I had this information, I totally would have made a different decision. And we're like, oh, dude, I'm sorry. You know, because that's what happened. It's not some plan. It's not some cool, slick thing where a guy in a suit comes and makes it all okay with some press release. We're making the game we want to make, and we hope that you guys come along and play with us. And anything other than that's a lie, you know?
Yeah,
and I think that's actually a good point. I'm sorry to cut you off, Alex. I'll just
No,
say that real quick because it's something that I have seen before. Like, one of the few companies that I've seen that has, with varying degrees of success, admittedly, but tried to keep a more open channel with their players. And again, this is more, again, I cover a lot more esports sides, but Riot Games, from League of Legends, has generally tried to keep a fairly open channel, but they've definitely, been burned in the past by, promising a certain feature too soon or talking about something and making it clear that it was just something they were working on, but then, players are still, I mean, you know how it is, once you say something once, it's out there and you can never take it back. So, I mean, was that ever, a concern of that sometimes you guys might paint yourselves into a corner or, something, anything like that?
Oh yeah, it's even kind of happened already. There's a mention on the site that we're going to have a wait list for particular homes, and we totally are going to do that, but we meant years from now when the whole system is online, and
right.
We already have people coming who are like, hey, I want this house on Camber Toll and it's taken, so how do I get on the wait list for it? And we're like, wait 4 years? Right, because if we just hadn't laid out our plans ahead of time, it wouldn't have ever come up, but because we did, now we have to explain, oh no, sorry dude, we meant that was going to come online at stage 6, and that's, several years from now, and oh dude, I'm really sorry about that,
Yeah,
right.
That's really interesting that, you bring that up, kind of leading into that. The deployment stages you guys have planned was something else that I think I've talked about in past shows on Theory Forge or Revival Cast as being also another thing that separates Revival from other MMO, RPG type games, and how the way you guys are deploying that seems like it's so beneficial in the design and development process because you're able to deploy and test and also kind of increase the complexity as you go rather than and you're able to do this on a small budget rather than being a big publisher AAA game where you're like, hey, we got to build this massive world and then we just launch it all, and test it, and it's just it seems like it's a lot of problems, and I've always kind of loved the elegance of this idea of, hey, let's deploy things and actually open up the world slowly to players as we get systems built.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually really love that we're doing it in public too, because stuff like this actually does often happen in the background of MMOs. It's why sometimes you'll see an announcement for an MMO and then 4 years will go by before you hear about it again. In the background, they're really doing the same sort of thing. They're building really small prototypes, proving out their stuff works, and then sort of scaling up from there. But because they don't have the access to the community that we have, they don't know until after they've invested millions of dollars into the effort whether it's going to work or not, right? And so we've even had discussions with our players about features that won't be in the game for a while that have totally changed, some of our approaches to the design because they had better ways to realize the ideal we were going for. And so that saves us so much effort, right? In traditional development, we would have taken our original thought on that idea, implemented it, and gone, oh, this isn't quite what we expected, and then maybe spent, $5 or $6 million trying to figure out what went wrong. Whereas now I can be like, hey, we're thinking about letting people grow old and die. How do you guys feel about that? And see literally what our players feel about it, and sort of react from there. And as a result, our implementation of those ideas, I think, is awesome. And it's directly because we were doing it all out in the open. And I think that's the way things should be done from now on. But that's, just because we're having a lot of success with it, I suppose. But I think we're going to see a lot of this in the future.
Definitely. I'm interested to see as Revival continues to grow and seems to be doing well in what it's doing, and if it continues to have success, how many other people are going to try and model, some of the business practices you guys have done that are very, very dramatically different than what's the typical done in the industry. But we actually have a question from the audience, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with, Sailkite. It's a massive paragraph, but he's basically asking what your stance or opinion is kind of on the management of player frustration, since Revival's gonna be containing some systems that are gonna allow players to negatively affect each other's experience. Do you guys talk about player frustration, and how do you balance frustration and fun? Aside from what he says, quoting, giving everybody mandatory emotion regulation courses.
Yeah, it's actually something we talk about all the time. I think recent conversations in our forums about PvP are sort of emblematic of the type of thing that brings this up. So, for example, we have these blessings of PvP protection that we basically include in our plan because we know that there are players who will love the kind of sim that Revival is, who will never, ever, ever want to be involved in PvP. And so for us, we were like, well, we don't want to give those players up. They're kind of core to what makes the beating heart of Revival's community work. And so how do we keep them and keep PvP players happy? And blessings were kind of our answer, but a lot of people don't like them, and we have to sort of figure out how to get people to understand that not every aspect of the game is fair, and it's not always for them specifically, but that the game as a whole is better off for it. And I think, honestly, just telling people that is way easier than trying to come up with some sort of mechanic that makes it all right. And so a lot of our answer is, we talk to people and we just tell them, hey, our world is specifically not going to be fair, and sometimes it's not going to be fair for pragmatic reasons like we need these players, or sometimes it's not going to be fair because it's actually more fun to overcome this kind of challenge where the deck is stacked against you. And so far, a lot of people seem to be understanding that, but to be fair, our community is pretty small right now, and I know that if we ever get any sort of mass market appeal, that whole debate is just going to happen again. But, our stance is, hey, look, this is the game we're building, and it is what it is, and if that frustrates you enough that you want to leave, then maybe you should. I'm not going to try to keep you in an abusive relationship.
Yeah, it ties kind of back into what I was talking about last week when I wrote an article on, problems with free-to-play, because you do have that, that's kind of the market right now. People that are playing MMO, especially MMORPGs, that are just all transitioning to this free-to-play kind of monetization models, and you're also playing to a larger online gaming audience who's in MOBAs and stuff that are used to free-to-play as well. You guys have to make money somehow, so you're utilizing kind of the blessing system and as part of it, and it's a weird place to be in. And I guess actually I haven't even gotten the chance to talk with you guys about the monetization and how do you make a good game for a free-to-play audience, because I feel like that's a really hard thing to do nowadays, and it seems like it grows more and more challenging as players get expectations, from other free-to-play titles they've been in.
Yeah, and free-to-play games are in our own way sort of establishing a convention, a traditional way to do it, and I think that's also kind of dangerous because players don't really like those traditions, those conventions. And I think that even our approach is maybe too close to that for some people, but our take on it was kind of, hey, we need to make money on this, and we can do it a bunch of different ways, but why don't we build our free-to-play system so that it solves the major problem that makes making a good free-to-play game hard, which is the content cost, right? So, yeah, we do have blessings and stuff that mitigate frustration for money. That's just flat out true. But most of the game is designed in such a way that people want to play it, hopefully, right? And we do this with our virtual DM system, which, keeps new content coming, even when there are no players, keeps the city sort of living and alive, and always offering things for players, and always depending on players to do things, and making players sort of dependent on the world. So when you log in and you go, hey, I'm going to check out this game, it's free, hopefully it hooks you the way like an old subscription MMO used to do, and makes you want to live there. And that's kind of what the philosophy behind our monetization strategy is make a game that people want to spend time in, and then we can make some of the money back by offering them ways to mitigate the individual things about our world that they don't really like. Though we do also have a rule where it's like nothing's ever perfectly safe, so you can't ever protect yourself completely. But that, we think, also works too, because it keeps the sort of element of risk that makes everything you gain sort of feel more worthwhile that I was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And hopefully the result is that free-to-play players come in and maybe they'll buy protections for those big nights when they want a game with their friends, but that otherwise they'll play it just like everybody else and sort of enjoy it and manage to just skate by on a few dollars or cents a month of stuff. And that's really all we need as long as the players show up.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because obviously there is that, real tricky balance with free to play. And I know for someone like me, I think one of the biggest reasons why I've never been an MMO gamer, it probably is time. But then you have, people that maybe they have that time, but they don't necessarily feel it's worth it. If you get into a game and, all right, well, here's why all these other players, have advantages over you. And, maybe if you grind out, for 10 hours a day over the next 6 months, you'll be able to get to their level. And I think that was one of the very cool things Revival was talking about, is that it's not just a matter of, okay, grind enough time and you'll get there. You want to really hook in that free-to-play player so that they want to spend the time, but not just, to climb up a ladder, so that they actually feel immersed, that they work on, you talk about actually being skilled at something. And, that's a very interesting way to go about immersion that I think is kind of missing from a lot of games these days.
Yeah, I think, wow, it's like stumbling over myself, I apologize. But I think that the idea that as you personally get better at it, you can see that happen in the game gives you way more investment into what you're doing. And the immersion is totally the reason we did it, but I also think it's compelling even from a purely ludological sense, from a purely mechanical sense. That sort of gratification doesn't exist in a lot of MMOs these days, and I think that's part of the reason players don't connect with them.
Yeah,
I think that's true, for sure.
I think I don't know, I'm trying to think of the right word. I can't think of the right word, but the fact that your monetization is the way it is, and you have, the distinct differences between your free-to-play plan for servers and your gold servers with the live GMs, it almost seems like in the ideal situation you'd have, a small number of free-to-play servers that are kind of like this gateway introduction where people can jump in, experience what this game is about, and then they're like, hey, this might be way better with having, GMs actually changing the content rather than just relying on, the AI, which may end up being really good at, creating dynamic content, but a human's always better. So having that and just saying, hey, I want to jump in, maybe I will do the subscription and jump into kind of a deeper gratification out of the game. So it's really interesting to me too. I hate saying intriguing and interesting all the time, but it's something different that makes you think and makes you kind of wonder about the potential of it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the fact that the servers will evolve differently, so that even among gold servers, there'll be different legends on different servers, should be, we're hoping, something super compelling. Like you'll want to go see what the world is like over there, because maybe that has something interesting that you've never seen before going on. And that'll be true both on free to play and on gold servers, but on gold servers even more so. I mean, they're like the Conan the Barbarian version, right? Everything's ancient and lost and big, and massive powers are always intervening. But at the heart of it, there's these players who are just trying to get by in the world. And I think the stories that come out of those servers are in and of themselves sort of a compelling advertisement for why you should pay that subscription.
Yeah, that kind of ties in. You were mentioning Conan and the gold servers, kind of having all these different legends. Donnie Ergo asked in the chat. I don't know if it might kind of help answer this, but a bit distant from Mechanic's question, why Lovecraft, I guess, from a lore standpoint. So I know that's more Chris's realm, but what can you answer on that?
Yeah, the answer is honestly because it's that weird fiction stuff is awesome, and it's creepy in a way that a lot of MMOs really have never tried. I mean, Secret World's the only one that comes to mind, and they did a really good job. They're a totally different kind of game, which we think leaves it open for us to do something really awesome with it. And the fact that Lovecraft's fiction is actually tied to Robert E. Howard's Conan and Call the Conqueror already sort of paints a picture of the kind of cool stuff that you can do with this sort of style of horror and our medieval setting. And so for us, we're super excited about it. It's the kind of weird fiction that we've always liked. It's the Den section of heavy metal, or Conan, or Call the Conqueror. It's these low fantasy, low magic, but lots of dirt and gritty stuff, but also this horrific stuff that's right on the liminal edge of what you can see. Powers and creatures that are so powerful you can't even comprehend them, and that leaves open so many awesome struggles and so many different ways that players can sort of overcome what seems like overwhelming odds, that it should create a almost like, Greek mythology level of epic story.
Yeah, very cool.
And and I think it's great that that we're looking at that, because that really is what can keep a game going. And obviously, getting the players involved in shaping the lore as well is very cool. And I think that actually leads into grab another question from the chat here. We kind of talked about it a little bit earlier, but we'll get back to it. We talked about balancing what needs to be versus what we want to do, and talked about having that open channel with the players. So can you give a kind of an example or two of certain ideas that either came directly from the community that you decided to implement, or maybe some things are really shaped by community feedback?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I should probably preface this with a disclaimer. Chris Holtorf and I have been tabletop game masters for basically all of our lives since we could read, and that sort of dynamic between player and GM sort of plays into our view of how to make a good game, right? And so part of the reason that Revival is built to be an evolving world is because if you're a good GM, you can walk in with like really sort of vague notions of what you want your story to be, and then let the players chisel out all the fine details and reveal the actual like sculpture of the story for you. And between the two of you, you feel like you did it together that way, and it's a much better way to work. And so this same philosophy, it's all over the actual game itself, but it's even over the game design. So like, I mentioned aging earlier. Aging was something we weren't even sure we were going to do, but I decided that I would float it, and I would see what the players thought about it. And in doing so, they revealed all kinds of extra elements of the mechanic that were possible that I hadn't even considered. And sometimes the things that players offer are way more mundane than that. Like just a couple of days ago, a player was like, "Hey, I think you should charge taxes for guilds, because that way, if a guild goes inactive, you don't have to like lose the vote that they have in a city or any of these other implications into other systems that being a guild has." And I was like, I hadn't thought about that, but that's a really good idea. And so in that thread, we sort of hashed out not just that guilds will pay taxes, but where those taxes will go, how they'll actually work, and like generally their purpose. And so I had a sort of vague notion of controlling guilds, but ultimately it was the player base that showed me the best way to pull it off. And that's the kind of back and forth that I think is totally necessary, not just in making a good game, but in making a collaborative experience. And I think at their heart, that's what MMOs are supposed to be.
Yeah, I've always felt like early MMOs, in Ultima Online and EverQuest, really pulled off of a lot of tabletop gaming. Your typical Dungeons and Dragons GM-driven experience is kind of what, where they originated from in a lot of ways. So seeing games, like Revival, I guess there's even, Sword Coast Legends planned to come out later in the fall, that's going to have the live GMing where you can kind of run more of that type of experience, in a digital format. So it's really cool to see kind of games going back more to that tabletop roots, because I think the thing that made tabletop gaming really unique and special in its peak, I think it's still really big now, is just the social experience. And being able to apply that to a digital format where you're engaging players from all around the country or world is really, really amazing. And I'm glad to see games kind of moving in that direction. So
yeah, me too, man. It's been kind of a holy grail amongst developers. Like, I'm certainly not alone in feeling like this is a cool thing to do. I actually got the chance to work with a guy when I was working at a place called The Collective on Dirty Harry. He was a designer on Silent Hill, but it turned out he was one of the original designers on UO, and was active during the beta. So I was a beta player, and so I sort of gushed about how my favorite experience was this moment that I don't even think was really planned, where one of the devs got online and was like, "Hey, come on out over to you. We've got a party. I'm going to give out prizes and all this cool stuff." And so when everybody showed up, said dev appeared as the Lich and was like, "Ha ha ha, you fools, I've trapped you all." And then he raised a bunch of zombies around the party. And as I'm telling the guy the story, he sort of gets this look on his face, and I was like, "Were you there?" And he's like, that was actually me, and my boss gave me all kinds of crap for that. But I agree, man, that's what I thought it was for, And we had this sort of cool moment where he talked about how even back then, even on UO, some of those ideals were sort of compromised in the name of business, right? Like those moment-to-moment events, which I thought made UO so great, it turned out were like snuck in by its developers when their bosses weren't looking, because their bosses were afraid they'd scare away subscribers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of what you guys, all that kind of just goes right into when you're reading about kind of the plan for the live storytelling gold servers, goes into that. I mean, EverQuest had a kind of like a guide and event system, you know, that, or guide and event mechanics, and they worked to some extent, but they didn't really take and do like the example you provided, where, you know, it's just another person over there GMing and actually creating this really memorable experience that isn't, you know, driven by the mechanics of the game. You know, it's got that human element to it that makes it unpredictable and memorable, I think.
Totally.
So one thing I'm actually curious about, because obviously to be able to keep that going, you need a certain kind of individual, you know, to be that kind of live storyteller. What do you look for? I guess, how do you kind of test people out to see if they're going to be able to, you know, to keep up that level of storytelling over time, to make sure that, you know, they're keeping it worthwhile for the players?
Yeah, so this is actually Omwa, Chris Holtorf's #1 concern. We don't want to hire anybody as a storyteller who can't cut it, but can't cut is a really strange thing to say, because this is really a job that doesn't exist in our industry right now. And so our criteria are more like, can you script on the fly? Can you puppeteer well? Have you ever been a DM? If you've been a DM, what kind of adventures do you run? In fact, why don't you just run us through an adventure right now? And so, like, we have this sort of audition process, you know, where we sort of test you on all of the various skills that are individually necessary, and then throw you in a milieu where you'd have to try all of them. And so, like, when we say run us through an adventure right now, we point them to a little, you know, online tabletop system, and we're like, well, here are the DM tools. I'm going to be a dwarf fighter. He's going to be an elven mage. Show us how it's going to work, right? And he has to use, you know, not just he, I shouldn't, that sounds bad. They have to use whatever tools are available, right, to sort of convey the type of storyteller they are. And, you know, we grade them on everything from presentation to actual technical prowess to, you know, how well they do dialogue. You know, all of the stuff matters, right? And so for us, we're kind of looking for that, like, super actor, game designer, voice talent, coder, artist guy. And so far what we're finding is they're very few and far between.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing to start filling that out as you guys get further along, and you're needing those people that have that, you know, really diverse backgrounds as far as being storytellers, but also technically proficient in, you know, the tools they're going to need to use to tell their stories. Because I guess, you know, that's really all it boils down to is, you know, being a good storyteller and being able to use, you know, knowledgeable enough with the tools you're going to need to use to tell the story. So, but I'm hopeful to see you guys find plenty, or at least enough to fill the Blackwell server, which I'll be on. So,
So that's all that really matters.
You're right.
No, but it's really cool.
Yeah, it's going to be tough for sure, man.
I'm excited to see, you know, all the things we've talked about as you guys get further along. You said earlier on in the show we were having a little bit of technical issues, but in case anybody missed it, like, it's literally any day till the first phase 1 deploys of having the offline client and housing, which I like. You know, we'll be able to get in and do some amount of things, but just having that, you know, it's like the first stone is laid kind of in the players' minds, I think. So getting to see that happen and watching, you know, the first of 6 kind of stones being set and watching that plan really come to life.
Yeah, definitely. We're kind of freaking out about it, but because for us it's also like I don't want to say a paradigm shift because that's not right, but it's also like it's the point in the race where suddenly you actually have to be serious about it. You know, you got to pick up the pace, right? So we've been kind of going slower than we really want to do, but we've been taking our time and just making sure that everything works the way we want it to. And since, you know, we have time before we put out our first release, we've been like, well, I guess we could ship that way, but no, let's fix that first, and that kind of stuff. But once the first version is out there, we have to make sure that we're giving you guys something worth seeing, because otherwise we're wasting the opportunity we have, right? So like, you know, we can't just release the empty houses as our first client and then do nothing for another 6 months, because that doesn't tell us anything useful. The reality is we're going to get the best input from our founders probably in the first couple of weeks after releasing that first version of the client. And so then we need to get the other things that are coming online as part of the stage in immediately, so that people can play them and test them as fast as they can. And so for us, that means, you know, we gotta pick up the pace. We gotta work harder. We gotta go faster. We gotta be on it, right? And so for us, we're like, oh God, here we come. You know?
Yeah, that first hill in the roller coaster, just getting up to the top and seeing the descent. So pretty exciting. Well, I think we're getting near towards the end of the show here. And, you know, being a part and a function of 10 Ton Hammer, for those of you who may have tuned into the show midway or something, and seen us talking here with Adam, Snipe Hunter from Ilphonics Revival, thanks you guys for tuning in and watching that. 10 Ton Hammer is a content website, written content, gaming, a lot of general gaming, but geared specifically towards a lot of MMO gaming and esports. So esports titles, so you guys can go check that out. There's a lot of good content there, and myself and Jeremy are both writers there. So if you could stand and enjoy hearing us talk here, we do a lot more of that in written form. So you guys can check that out on 10 Ton Hammer. For me personally, it's up in the air for next week. I'm not sure. I'm really waiting on. There's different things I'm following with as far as Revival's client dropping. You know, hopefully next week would be cool, but definitely take your time, you guys, and get it right. But I'll be covering that, and of course the Daybreak titles I cover, and I'm sure a couple column entries in there too. So you can look for that from me. Jeremy, you have anything for next week you want to share?
Yeah, we got a few things coming up. We're continuing redoing our Heroes of the Storm guides, just making sure that A, the information is current, and B, we're making them all pretty and nice. So that's actually a lot of my work, getting in a lot of time with that. Other than that, we got to cover more of the esports titles. So we're looking probably like Hearthstone's expansion is still going to be a couple of weeks off, but we're looking forward to that and seeing what information comes out there. And other than that, you know, just covering whatever comes up. So, you know, it should be a pretty exciting couple of weeks for us, I think.
Yep. And for the other authors too, I think with the World of Warcraft expansion being announced, there's a lot of coverage on that. So if you guys want to check that out, but yeah, again, you know, support us if you can. It helps us keep doing what we do. If you enjoyed the show, and you know, us getting to have guests like Snipe Hunter on, you know, support us, and we'll be able to keep doing this and getting other guests, other Revival developers, or other game developers too, and just kind of increasing the awareness of different games, and kind of giving you guys a chance to one-on-one with developers too, kind of, you know, sharing your questions through Twitch chat. That's why we love this format. So
yeah, for sure. And just to be honest, the more you guys support the site and the more attention we get to this show, probably the more cool guests like we had today we're going to be able to keep getting. So yeah, we definitely you know, could use you guys, but really we want to do it to give the best content we can for you, and just, you know, to make the show as cool as possible, you know, make it as enjoyable as possible for all you guys, you know, who have been awesome enough to hang out with us. So definitely, you know, thanks for coming on, checking it out, and chatting with us. Appreciate it.
Yes, definitely. And we want to thank too, of course, our guest Adam. Thanks again for coming on. It's always a pleasure to talk with you and kind of hear your mindset from the systems, and just being a veteran, you know, a veteran in the industry, and really knowledgeable. So thank you for sharing your time with us and with the audience here that's come to watch the show. We really appreciate it, and definitely looking forward to Revival.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me. I love stuff like this.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, in case you guys tuned in late and you didn't get to see the whole show, you'll be able to find it on Twitch here. The replay will be up, and then I will shortly highlight it and port it to YouTube, so you can find it there. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can watch it live on 10 Ton Hammer Network, twitch.tv, so check it out. But we want to thank all you guys for coming, and that's going to be it for us today.
All right. Thanks, guys, again for hanging out with us. It's been awesome.
Bye, everybody.